Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And I'm so delighted today to be joined by the wonderful Midori Francis to talk about her new Netflix series, Dash and Lily. And I wanted to start by asking you about when you first got the scripts for it, once you'd landed the role, kind of before you even arrive on set and before you go into any sort of rehearsal process, what that process looks like when you're sitting with the scripts and kind of deconstructing and figuring out the different layers of the character, and also like how much you like to develop a character before you arrive on set and see how everybody else is interpreting their characters as well.
Totally. I think it obviously depends on the role. Um, this character in particular, actually, I wanted to do a lot before I got there, simply because on the surface, Lily was optimistic, bubbly, loves Christmas. And I felt that it was very important to make sure that she was well-rounded and that, okay, she loves Christmas. Cool, but like, why does she love Christmas? Is there some hidden sadness that she's covering up for? Is there a part of her that doesn't want to grow up? And so I thought it was crucial to kind of do that character dive, especially because at first glance one might not assume you have to do that. So I did a bunch of stuff on Lily, and then I also did a lot of mapping out just logistically what was going on between Dash and Lily, because I think we only had 2 scenes together, Austin and I. So the majority of our relationship develops off screen. And as an actor, that can be difficult to track. So I wanted to make sure that every time, and then of course, when you're shooting a series, we were shooting episode 104 and 105, and then sometimes inserting stuff from 107 because it's location based. So it was like, where am I in my Dash and Lily journey? Like, how much have I let Dash in at this point? How much has Dash changed me at this point? And another thing is that I think one thing that the director of the pilot, Brad Silberling, and I discussed a lot was in episodes 1 and 2. I had this impulse, I think, to always make Lily very strong and to know what she wanted and things, because I didn't want her to come across as flimsy or as airy. But we had a lot of discussions, and so once went a little head to head about like, well, we need her to start in a certain place, then she can grow. And so for me, it was a lot of trust that the Lily that we meet in episode 2 she'll have the chance to kind of challenge herself and grow and become more well-rounded.
Yeah, and I love that you're mentioning Brad directing the first 2 episodes, and then you also had Pamela Romanowski and Fred Savage coming in to direct the other episodes. And I know that there is some challenge because you get used to the dynamic and the rapport with one director, and then someone else comes in. But is there also an advantage in working with the 3 of them in the fact that each of them came in with a different interpretation of Lily and kind of like was able to add to the layers that you'd already constructed for her with their interpretation?
Definitely. And I think even more in retrospect, when upon watching the show, I realized how what a gift that was, because you know I think that although it is a cohesive story, I can tell which are the Brad episodes, which are the Pamela episodes, and which are the Fred episodes. Especially 1 and 2, like Brad is so detail oriented. Um, we I think there was a time, like, it was an insert of my hand taking a book out. I swear to God, we spent like, I mean, maybe I'm being dramatic, but it felt like 7 hours on that shot. And at the time, I appreciated it for sure, but it was only when I watched the first 2 episodes, I was like, oh, Brad, he was doing everything he needed to do to set up this world, and the cinematography of 1 and 2 and the magic element. Like, the first thing I actually thought of when I watched it with my voiceover, and I was like, oh, is this Harry Potter? It just like felt magic-y. And so like that special kind of like film touch that I think Brad brought to 1 and 2, and setting the tone of the series was essential. And then of course when Pamela came in, I mean, she was also a teenage girl, and there's a shorthand and an understanding between 2 women who have been teenage girls, especially because she was also a bit of a weird teenage girl like I was. So we had the ability to kind of I never had to explain anything to Pamela, or we just had this trust between us. Which I think, like, the fact that she did like the dance sequence in episode 3, the Hanukkah dance, the fact that it was her, that was just perfect. It just ended up being perfect because I feel like another director might have been like, I think we had choreographers help me who were incredible from Be More Chill, but one of the moves that I suggested was like punching in the air. And I think that if it was anybody else besides Pamela, they might have been like, this is, I don't get it. It's not funny. It's not cute. It's just weird. Um, but she had such we just had such a shorthand and such a trust between us, being women, that everything I did felt like she accepted it and understood it. And we got to have these long talks about Lily and what it meant to be 17. And then Fred came in, and then Fred has so much experience with television. I mean, being a child actor, being an actor, and then he's directed. I didn't even know this about him until I met him, but he had directed so many episodes of Modern Family and things like that. So he was aware of all of the traps, like all of the things that could have come across as shallow or not developed. So he was always pushing me to for character development specifically, and he was very interested in less of, honestly, the film aspects, the cinematography, and more about like, okay, what's going on with Dash and Lily? How are they progressing? Are we noticing that Lily is becoming more self-assured? Is she more grounded? So yeah, it was cool. But definitely upon like watching them, I was like, oh, I see that's Fred's episodes. I see that's Pamela's. I see that's Brad's.
Yeah. And you're mentioning the voiceover, which is obviously such a used tool within the telling of this story. And I was interested in not only how that was interesting in terms of the performance of that and putting together that narrative voiceover work when you can't rely on the physicality of a performance, but also how at the same time it really allowed you an internal journey into Lily's mind, and for the audience as well, that we don't usually get the opportunity to have, because so frequently when voiceovers are utilized, it's just to kind of tell you the A to B of what's happening. But here it is her innermost thoughts and secrets.
Yeah. I think that in particular, weirdly enough, I think that you got to know about Lily when you watched Dash do things with my voiceover. And so I think that the voiceovers were essential because, since they didn't meet very often, the only real interactions you have are through these voices matched with action. And so it was sort of, honestly, I talked to Joe the other night on the phone, actually, our showrunner, Joe Trace, and we were talking about how the device of them not meeting ever and just these kind of long monologues, that it could have very much not worked, or you wouldn't have bought that they liked each other, you wouldn't have felt the chemistry, or you wouldn't have been rooting for them. So it was definitely I think, like, a challenge and something that might not have worked, but it was, everyone collaborated well together to make sure that it did. And like, yeah, I think that you got to see, through my voice encouraging Dash, and then Dash, standing outside in front of Diker Heights and like putting his arms out in the snow with my voice. Subconsciously, we were moving the story along with the audience through the voiceovers, and I think it was like sneaky in that way.
Yeah. And there's so many of those scenes as well, where when you're actually filming it, obviously you don't have the voiceover there at the moment, but you're also filming a lot of scenes without a scene partner, where you're trying to build a chemistry with them. So what was kind of the unique aspect of approaching those types of scenes and doing that type of chemistry building when, like you said, they really only have a couple of scenes together later in the series?
Yeah, sorry. So do you mean like, what was it like doing the scenes where we were together or not together, or
When you weren't together?
we were? Yeah. Well, it became, there was moments in our show where it's for sure a rom-com, and then there are moments in our show where it's like a coming of age story. And I think a lot of those scenes were just about Lily and about how Lily grows. Of course, Dash is involved, but I mean, when Dash challenges me to do something, of course there's an element of love between us because it's Dash that dared me, but it's not really about Dash. It's about how, because of Dash, Lily has to go eat a pie with a piece of cheese on it. And it seems like a small, stupid, frivolous thing, but actually just even stepping a little bit outside her comfort zone you see her progress in her personal life. You see her start to put herself out there. You see her, starting to make friends and to question, wow, I lived my whole life thus far, all 17 years, thinking that I'm this reject and that everyone hates me. But now that I've confronted my middle school bully, I see that he was just a kid too. And maybe I misread this whole situation. And maybe I have my whole sense of self is wrong, So I think that by not working with Austin and by Austin not working with me, you were able to really just see these two characters on their own grow, And that's what I love about it, is like it's a love story, but it's also their love ultimately helps them grow individually.
Yeah. Another relationship I was really interested by the dynamic of on screen was the sibling relationship with Lily and her brother as well, because I think that the way that the two of you captured that just felt so authentic. And I know that you have brothers yourself. So like you understand that dynamic, not just in terms of what it's like to have a sibling, but also kind of the difference between the fact that he's the older one, she's the younger one, and kind of the dynamic that uniquely brings in. So what was that like in terms of just determining what those different beats of that relationship were going to look like?
Yeah, I think that there were, oh goodness, like especially sometimes with sibling relationships, like and in the rom-com format, everything gets glossed over. And I remember like Troy is a bit sarcastic and sardonic, honestly. And so like I remember thinking like it's very rare that my brothers and I have like sentimental, heartfelt moments free of like punching each other or like giving each other a dirty look or whatever. That's just not my experience of being a brother and a sister. Like of course they love me and they would go out and beat anybody up for me, and honestly vice versa. But on a day-to-day basis, it's not exactly mushy. And so I remember like the little moments where like Troy made a face at me and I was like, back, it's like those little natural moments of like messing with each other, or honestly not even liking each other very much and having to tolerate each other, or having this annoying guy barge into your room. Like I felt like it was just so important that element was there. And I appreciated the fact that I had brothers, like that I knew how to do that, because I've had to play a sister of a sister before, and I love it. But it's because I don't have a sister, I had to do a lot more like research or kind of feel it through. But this was just, it was like, well, probably most of the time I'm annoyed by him. Some of the time I want his approval because he's my older brother, and that's about it.
There's also the really interesting aspect in terms of friendships, in that Lily really doesn't have friends in her own peer group. And so we see her kind of hanging out with adults a lot. And I feel like that also kind of like shifts her maturity level as well. She has the maturity to genuinely hang out with these people and have real relationships and real friendships. So how did that kind of impact some of the choices that you made in terms of thinking about the fact, yeah, she's still a teenage girl, but at the same time, she's also spending a lot of time with people that are much more mature around her, and that's going to shift and change her worldview and her approach as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I've had people say to me like, "Oh, Lily's immaturity, Lily's immaturity," and I took question to that simply because I remember being like, "Well, why don't you think she's mature?" And people, someone would be like, "Well, she's not out drinking, or she hasn't, dated." And I'm like, "Well, that's interesting that we're equating maturity for a woman with going out and drinking and dating," but I think that I think that Lily is very much one of those people who will get to college and find her stride, and in high school, not so much. But these relationships with these older people, they allow her to feel like, being smart is okay. Choosing to read a book and not go to a party is okay. And those are things that she might learn in college, but she's certainly not going to learn in high school. Um, and then I also think that probably it's a bit of a cop out, because at the end of the day, like as you see, oh, there's actually a scene that got cut in, I think, the last episode, where she runs into one of the girls from the soccer team, and you learn that actually the girl likes her very much. Lily had no idea this whole time. But I think Lily thinks that people her own age don't like her. And so in some ways, this caroling troop, hanging out with her grandpa on a Friday night, hanging out with these people who are much older, it's actually like a bit of a cop out. It's a bit of like well, these people understand me, but people my own age don't understand me.
Mhm.
When actually, and you see this character development, you know, they would understand her if she just gave them the chance and vice versa. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and to that point as well of like having trouble with some connections with her peer group, there's also a little bit of an innate loneliness to her as well that I feel like you bring kind of like really quietly through your performance in a lot of nuanced ways. How did you think about those particular moments and how you wanted to express that side of her? Because obviously it's not something that she's saying out loud and expressing frequently, but it's something that we really feel is kind of like an undertone. Like you said earlier, like even when she's like being super outgoing, there's still kind of like that quietness going on inside of her as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that like one thing that I've learned from being an actor, you know, I started professionally in 2014. And I think one thing that I've learned, because I've played characters honestly sort of similar to Lily in The Wolves in New York, I played we were all numbers, and mine was the girl who loved Disneyland and cried when she couldn't go about Mulan. And I think that I learned early on that for characters like this, that you can't just be like, oh, she loves Christmas or oh, she loves Disney World. It's like if anybody loves Christmas that much, like as like honestly pathologically as Lily does, obviously it's covering something. Obviously it's there's something that she relies on externally about the holidays that fill something that she's missing inside. And so I just tried my best to, for all of these like character descriptions, like bubbly, you know, optimistic, whatever, like, you know, it's kind of like the person who always has, and sometimes that's me, inspirational notes all over their walls. I mean, there was a year when I had so many that it looked like a crazy person lived there. But it's like, you don't have inspirational notes all over your walls unless you're working through something or unless you don't feel very inspired, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to look at a character like Lily, like she loves Christmas because of the bright lights. And it's like, no, she doesn't love Christmas because of the bright lights. She loves Christmas because she doesn't feel connection in her day-to-day life. She doesn't feel like she has a family in high school. And so this one day of the year becomes so important to her. And it's so important that it's done right and that everything goes perfectly. And if one little thing goes wrong, if one family member is not there, her entire world collapses. And so I just felt like, of course, I'm going to try and understand why that is and not just say like, I love tinsel, you know, because that's just not real. That's not human, you know?
Yeah. I also wanted to talk a little bit about her costumes and the costume design on the series as a whole, because they are such a vehicle into her personality and who she is. And so every single detail in them is so immaculately crafted. And I know that the costume design team even actually handmade some of her jewelry. There's the scene where we see, you as Lily actually constructing your own Christmas sweater. Yeah. So how did those also just like add an extra layer to like how you were able to channel her personality and really view those aspects of her?
Yeah, so our costume designer, Christina, we've actually been talking recently a lot about the response, about the costumes, and her whole team of people who are just incredible. She had such a clear idea about Lily when I met her that I actually felt like, okay, I'm going to take care of the acting part and you're going to take care of the costume part, because her costume part fit in with my idea about the acting. You know, it was just so symbiotic and everything. But Christina was incredible. I mean, I think it was like, I was in my trailer once. It was like, we did a lot of overnights. It was 4 a.m. and she came in and I was like, what are you doing here? Because normally in the middle of the shoot, you don't see the costume designer at 4 a.m. And she was like, oh, sorry, I was just in my apartment. I was designing your earrings. And I was like, it's 4 a.m. But I mean, I don't know if you remember, like, I think it's episode 1 or 2, that enormous necklace I have with all the ornaments. I mean, she did that herself. She was in Austin, Texas, going to craft stores looking for like the perfect earrings to then take apart and build. And because I, as Midori, do not have any sewing skills whatsoever, let alone, honestly, fashion skills, I was like, great. I'm so grateful that I have Christina to take care of that part. But I can't speak for her, but I would also say that she's probably grateful that she had an actor who is down, because I mean, that was a big necklace. I mean, it was like, she was like, here you go. And it was just like 5 ornaments. It was so heavy. And never once was I like, you know what, this is too much. I was always like, yeah, of course, let's go for it. But when I think it was the scene I was like gluing fringe on, I was not doing any of that. I don't know how to do that. But one of my favorite costumes is the one where I go to the underground punk club, the blue fringe. I mean, that was, and she did all of that, like stitched it all. Oh, it was fabulous.
The costumes are incredible. And I was
Yeah.
also interested in your relationship to a lot of the locations. Like, I love that you live in New York and you've been living here for several years, because when you watch the series and you live in New York or you know these spaces, there is not a single location in that series that is there by accident. Every single location tells you so much more. Like the fact that it's specifically the Strand bookstore and
Yeah.
like Two Boots Pizza and video store, like what those tell you on another level. So how did you kind of look at the different locations that were being utilized and think about kind of the deepening relationship that Lily has with the city and with New York, and what those specific locations said about her as a character and this journey that she's going on character wise?
Yeah. Well, first, by the way, the Strand moved to Columbus in the
Yeah.
Upper West Side, which is now very close to where I live, and I need to go check it out. Um, yeah, I think that it was nice playing a character who was so not jaded by New York,
Mhm.
despite living there. And I think the fact that the Strand bookstore was her home is like, I guess my equivalent of that would be like the drama bookstore before that was shut down. But that was sort of my place that I would go to in between auditions, or when I was having like a bad day, or when I really wanted certain things to be happening with my career or my art and they weren't happening. And I would go there and be surrounded by all of these plays. And I just felt like so at home. And so I remember I used that sort of as, that's probably what the Strand is to Lily, because Lily just loves to read. And how cool is it, specifically in New York, that like, sure, you have your apartment or whatever, but the city is your home. And that, I'm sure that other cities have that, but there's, in my opinion, there's nothing quite like New York, especially when usually most of your, this is the biggest apartment I've ever had, but the one that I had before this was, I think it was like less than 300 square feet. And so, you're not really going to be spending all of your time in your apartment. And so, yeah, it was cool to know exactly what you said. Like every place that Lily went to or asked Dash to go to was her home. It was part of her. It was like the place that she chose to spend her time. And that's very, I think, uniquely New York.
Yeah. And, on a different aspect of her as a character, there's that really poignant moment where she's kind of up on stage with a microphone and she's talking about regrets that she has and chances that she didn't take. But there's also a line where she talks about feeling like she wasn't Asian enough, which gives such a window into her feeling like she's spent her life kind of pulled between two different cultures and two different worlds. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about that aspect of her as a character, and how you really thought about and constructed that element in portraying what that would be like for her living in New York, but feeling like she never kind of completely fits into either space.
Well, that's lovely that you gathered that. So actually, interestingly enough, the line is too Asian, not Asian enough. But no, don't be sorry, because we had so many discussions, Joe and I, about exactly what you just said.
Mhm.
And to be completely honest, I don't think that in the script as written that her identity struggle between being Asian and white or biracial is necessarily like implicitly written at all.
Mhm.
But I, as the, neurotic, nerdy actor I am, I was like, oh, I got to layer this in everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think just the sheer fact that it was me playing Lily as opposed to somebody else, like that 100%, that was always in there. I think because Lily too is, Lily struggles with the dark and the light. Like she can't face her certain feelings. And so her struggle with her identity, like who is she really? And if she doesn't have Christmas, like all of that was informed for me by her being biracial and those sorts of things. So it's awesome that you gathered that from my performance, but it's not like we had an episode that explored that or anything. But that line in particular, it was not in the script. I think when I got the role, Joe is so incredible, and he was like, "What are your thoughts, etc." And it was really important for me that we brought that up, especially because for most of the response to that monologue has been so positive and like, oh man, that's exactly what I would want to say. But some of it is like really like, oh, some guy makes fun of you once and you're gonna And so for me to to have that line in there was really important because it's actually way more than that. You know, it's like Lily being played by someone like me is a person who is made fun of for many reasons, but one of them is probably because of the way she looks, or because she's Asian, or she's not Asian enough, or whatever it is. So having that in the speech for me just kind of grounded the whole thing and made it so much more specific and real to the actress that was playing her. Yeah.
Yeah. And then lastly, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your approach in training as an actor, because I know that training was something that was always an important aspect of how you saw your career going, and something that you felt was a real necessity to you, and was interested in what the valuable tools were from going through that training and really studying, that have really kind of continued to help you throughout your career and influence the way that you work with a lot of characters that you take on, whether it's theater or whether it's a role like this in the series.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, I mean, I loved school so much. Like, I wanted to go back because I got a BFA in acting. I wanted to get an MFA at some point, and I was actually considering it. But then I was like, okay, I just got a BFA. Let's relax and try and go do some work first. But I loved school. Oh my God. It was, well, first of all, because we didn't have to sit at desks. That was very helpful for my temperament. I think most of my classes were spent sitting on the floor or whatever, or moving around. But what I think, how did my training inform me? For example, one of the things that my teachers, I went to Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers, they always would say, like, I don't care if you're reading a telephone book. Like, I really don't. Like, your job as the actor is to justify these words. Your job is to create meaning, and your job is to mean what you say.
Mhm.
And I feel like had I not had that, I might have gotten a script like Dash and Lily and just looked at Lily and not given her the full benefit of the doubt that she is just as important, just as human, just as complicated and messy as like your greatest, I don't know, Marlon Brando character, you know? And so because of my training with school, I feel like whenever I get a character, like I love my characters so much. I am so defensive over Lily, like probably more than I am of myself. So if people don't understand her or they look past her, I'm like, no, she's so much more than what you're saying. And so I think the respect that I learned at school for text, the respect that I learned for taking your work seriously, and for never just letting that first glance be the thing, but that it is your job to mine the text, mine the character, find the things about her that are human, you know? And so I so appreciate my training, and I would not be where I am. I would just, I wouldn't be nowhere where I am without it.
Yeah. Well, I think everything that you just said is exactly why this character, Lily, has so much depth and has really been resonating with people in the way that she has. And thank you so much for talking to us all about the series today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of your questions and for loving Lily and all of those sorts of things.